Welcome to Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Hello, Otterites! It is episode 176.
I am Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I am Francis in the captain's chair somehow, beyond my understanding. I went to the bathroom and I came back and the boy said, oh, by the way, you're captaining this episode. Gee, thanks.
Well, I mean, we're slaves to our direction, and you were set on the Trello as the captain, so therefore...
Oh, God. Yeah, but I didn't have nothing to do with that. But anyway, here we are. But we were noticing, this is episode 176, and we're going to talk about the election of 1876. There's no better pointer to us making the right decision than that, I think.
Well, we've concluded our series on treaties and agreements and international hoo-ha stuff. So it was time to get back to U.S. history for a history episode.
Well, that's a good palate cleanse, you know, as
well, we've talked about this particular event in history. You know, we've done several election episodes, and we point to this as one of the first modern, not quite constitutional crisis elections.
It was close.
But it was pretty damn close.
It was close, yes.
Which is ironic to me because it followed the Constitution perfectly. But yet that seems to be a problem. Because, and really it is, because the way that the setup is done, it's kind of goofy that it can happen this way, but in all of the elections we've had, it's really only happened a few times.
That's correct. And in modern times, it's happened, you know, essentially twice. 2000 is the one they...
Well, no, not like this. It's never happened like this.
Well,
before.
That's kind of where I was going, is that everybody says that, in 2000 especially, wait a minute, this should never happen, the Constitution is broke, let's fix it. I'm saying, boys and girls, you guys don't know what broke almost was unless you look back to 1876.
Well, and even then, it wasn't broken.
Correct.
It was that people didn't like that it allowed it.
Exactly my point. That's right.
That's the problem.
If you don't get the answer you like, you whine and cry.
Well, but now, to be
sooner
fair,
or later,
though,
there must be one winner.
Yeah, so let's
set the backdrop.
Because these Highlander boys, there can only be one, right?
So, 1876, Grant is completing his second term, and we've talked about Grant's presidency a bit. So it's uneven. There are some accomplishments. There's the suppression of the Klan. There's some stability. The amendments are complete and in place, but there's some corruption and there's some mess.
And yet, Grant was still amazingly popular.
Yeah.
At this time, Grant could have easily, even under the shadow of all the crap that had gone on, he could have easily won that third term. That's been
he angled for it.
Yeah, that's
he
right.
wanted it. He was going to go ahead and do it and break the precedent. But there was still a pretty strong feeling amongst the people in the party that we shouldn't break the precedent. As much as we love you, Ulysses, we're not going to break the precedent. We're going to look somewhere else.
Right.
James G.
Sooner or
Blaine,
later you got to anyway, so let's just go ahead and do it now.
Let's pull the Band-Aid off and let's look for somebody new. James G. Blaine was kind of the leading candidate going into the convention, but he doesn't get the required delegates to claim the nomination after several ballots.
Right.
And his total began declining, and they started looking elsewhere and settled on the reform-minded governor of Ohio, Rutherford B. Hayes. Hayes had been in Congress, again, governor of Ohio. He was a guy that had been out there, not like a big shining star guy. He hadn't been really in the executive branch yet. He never held a cabinet post or anything. But he was well thought of. Yeah. He was thought of as honest. He is a Union veteran, breveted Major General, I think.
That's right.
A wounded combat vet.
Which at this point in history, all of them are going to be that. I mean, for the next several elections, you've got...
Yeah, I mean, anybody that missed the war probably isn't going to get traction in the Republican Party.
Correct.
On the other side, of course, Democrats have been out of power now since Andrew Johnson.
And it was a pretty pathetic power when they had it. Because it really wasn't.
They're beginning to recover.
It was just the presidency.
Yeah, that's right.
And, presidency with the Congress being controlled by
Yes.
The other side is really it's weak,
So
especially at this time.
At this point, the Democrats are beginning to recover. They do have the House. They don't have the Senate, but they do have the House going into 1877. And Tilden, again, is very well thought of. He's governor of New York. Again, thought of as a reformer and an honest
He's
guy.
the Democratic nominee.
Yes, he pretty much cruises to the nomination for the Dems. And again, they are starting to recover. The memory of the war is sort of... It's not in the back seat, but at least sitting in the passenger seat, it's quiet.
Well, because Reconstruction has dominated the national consciousness since the war. And that's kind of where this whole thing hinges
right, and
on.
that's what it ends up really. Everybody's kind of wore out on Reconstruction.
That's right.
So, Tilden and Hayes, of course, they do the classic 19th century campaign through surrogates without really making public appearances on their own behalf and all that kind of thing. So, Tilden wins the popular vote by about 200,000 votes total. But it's very, very close in a lot of places. And when certain states begin to report their results, there are issues.
Well, that's unthinkable.
Unthinkable.
That's right.
So, Louisiana and South Carolina in particular are still states where there is a military presence, essentially, where the U.S. military runs the two states almost.
Occupied territory.
Yeah.
You might as well say.
So, South Carolina in particular reports like 101% returns. So, clearly, something's wrong.
Right.
So, yeah, what's going on is that basically they're undermining the elected governments by disenfranchising the freedmen and reporting basically only white votes.
Right.
Essentially.
Right. Yes.
And so Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, all three states are in contention. And there's an oddball situation in Oregon, of all places, where Hayes won the state, but one elector has to drop out and gets replaced by a Tilden elector. So now suddenly, instead of 3 votes for Hayes, it's 2-1. And so there's basically a mess in front of Congress. Congress decides to get a commission established, an electoral commission. And this is, I mean, this is like not until almost February.
Yeah,
I mean,
you think 2000 was bad?
This is,
at least by Christmas we had it done.
Yeah, so this is a mess.
Well, it was a longer deadline back then.
That's right.
Going all the way
because you're talking about
March is the inauguration.
March is the inauguration.
Yeah.
That's right.
So this is dragging on, but the intention was for the commission to be pretty equal. So it's supposed to be, I think it was 5 from the House, 5 from the Senate, and 5 more that were going to be mostly from the Supreme Court. I think I'm maybe not getting the details of this right, but
the point is though that the other than, because obviously you don't want anybody from the executive branch because that's technically only the president and the vice president, but
that's right. Yeah.
Even though you're talking Grant and his vice president in that case, but you want disinterested parties, so to speak. Even though technically there are no disinterested
nobody's.
parties.
Yeah. So yes, it's supposed to be 5 Supreme Court justices, 5 people from the House, 5 people from the Senate, and the idea was to pretty much divide these spots up evenly between the parties and to try to find as impartial a justice from the Supreme Court as kind of the tie-break spot, number 15.
Right.
Only the guy that the Democrats were accepting of also got elected to the Senate at the same time and decided to resign his seat from the Supreme Court to take up the Senate seat.
Right now, and let's talk about that for a second. That's unheard of in today's.
Goes the other way around now.
Yeah, you would never leave the court to go to the Senate.
Right.
But you might leave the Senate to go to the court.
Even that's almost unheard of anymore.
The political pressure would be enormous not to do that, unless you were an extremely safe state.
Yeah, but no, there's no such thing anymore.
Exactly, that's right.
As not even as safe. I'm just talking about nonpartisan.
Yeah,
just to be on the court, you need to be to be nonpartisan. That's impossible for a politician anymore.
Yeah, and they certainly want the idea being to get someone who's been involved in jurisprudence, rather than a politician.
Right.
So
that's why, as a general rule, I mean, it's very different today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, even back then, I think it's a little bit dicey when you think about going from, Supreme Court to the Senate. I mean, I would much rather see a judge go to the Senate than a senator go to the court.
Yeah, I mean, see that. Yeah, absolutely.
To me, that seems to be
because he brings his partisanship along with him.
Right. And I'd rather, if he's partisan, I'd rather he leave the court and just get into politics. But I think one of the things we need to talk about here, because people are going to think about today's, the last, 3 of the last, since 2000, 0, 8, 4, 8, so, last 6 elections, give or take a little, we have had some kind of contested vote in the sense of the guy who's won the popular vote doesn't necessarily get all the electoral votes, twice now.
Right.
And, it's something that from a very egalitarian fairness, and I use fairness in the real sense, not like, how leftists tend to use it nowadays. It just sits wrong with us. We think the guy who gets the most popular vote ought to be the winner. In a perfect world, yes, that would be the case. But now when we look at it in the United States, where we've had this happen twice now, 2000 and 2016, the votes were extremely close. We're talking less than 1% for 2000, and in 2016 it was something similar, a couple of percent at most. Here we're talking a nearly 3% difference between the popular vote
and the electoral vote.
Between the winner of the popular vote and the loser of the popular vote. So even though the raw numbers say this is much closer, 200,000 votes, percentage-wise, it's much farther apart because, smaller population.
Correct, yeah.
So for this to happen, if those kind of percentages were applied today, we'd be talking, millions of votes, not just a few 100,000.
Yeah.
And the electoral vote was much closer here.
Yes, and remember the whole purpose of the Electoral College is you're balancing
population.
The founders don't get enough credit for this genius. They are forcing you to win by forming coalitions of different interests.
Yeah.
You can't just dominate the process by winning California and New York.
But aren't we dangerously close to that right now?
Oh, that's been a discussion for a long time.
Because, if you think about the way the popular vote has gone, a Republican president has not won the popular vote since 2004. So even though we've had 3 winners since, 3 Republican winners since 1990.
Yeah, because the surplus margin in California is so great.
Well, and in New York and in even Chicago with Illinois, it dominates the rest of the state, which is very red.
We have become more urban with regards to the number of souls.
Not so much that; it's that the very large urban centers have become so dominated by the Democratic Party.
Well, they're monolithic at this point. Yes.
Well, electoral vote-wise, yes. It's not exactly the case, but yeah, because there's there are some places in Texas where it's a little more red. Cincinnati is a little more red than blue. It's not.
Yes, but most of the urban centers now
blue.
Are single party. There hasn't been. Even in some place like Louisville, that isn't far left. There hasn't been.
Compared to the rest of Kentucky, it's far left.
Yeah.
Yes.
But compared to Chicago, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, it's not.
San Francisco.
Yeah. A place that's even relatively moderate and conservative like Louisville hasn't elected a different party mayor since 1972.
Right.
So,
and we haven't had in the congressional district here in the 3rd district. We had a very brief Republican representative for 8 years, I think.
Yes, I think Ann Northup served 4 terms.
4 terms, so 8 years, which oddly coincides with Bill Clinton's presidency. Strangely enough, you would think it would go the other way because that's how that stuff tends to go. But anyways, so we are dangerously close to that, even given.
Yes, because of the way the population has concentrated in certain places.
Well, and really,
it's harder to put together a coalition of diverse interests in the states because the interests are hardening.
Well, I think it's even not so much that. It's that because I think if the way communication works today was the same as it was back then, I think we would be more like what the founders envisioned. Because the old adage that all politics is local, doesn't apply as much anymore. Because
very true. Because
there is no such thing as local news. I mean, there is. But, I mean, most news is national now, not local.
On the political stage. Your local news is your weather. And that's
sports and weather is your local news.
That's right,
when you watch, the nightly news, at 11 o'clock or the 6 p.m. or whatever it is, it's going to be some local stuff. If somebody gets killed locally, okay, they're going to cover that. But a lot of that's still going to be national coverage.
That's right, because that doesn't happen even in the big cities that much.
Right. Well, no, in the big cities it does.
Yeah.
Chicago, Detroit, Washington, New York, all of those. Murders constantly happen.
To the point where they don't get covered. Unless they're sensationalistic.
You might make that argument. I don't know if that's
Since
the
we don't live there, I'm kind of spitballing.
Exactly.
It does.
But the point is, though, that the stories that dominate everybody's minds are the national stories unless they're extremely sensational. Somebody gets caught in bed with a live girl or a dead boy. That's going to override national stories.
Well, it bleeds out, too, because it's going to become national.
Well, and sometimes it becomes
if it
national.
reaches a certain point.
And our attention span is so short,
right.
There's no longer any kind of in-depth journalism.
True.
There's
and that's
just, I mean, you got to be able to see it on your phone like that. So every report is LMPD responding to a body at such and such an address. And then that's the whole story.
Right.
And then it's really rare to know any more than that.
Well, to be fair, since we talk about writing so much, that is the essence of the story.
That's right.
I mean, when we think about, because, since we like to talk about writing so much, when we talk about what makes a story, if you can summarize your story in one sentence,
why would you need anything else?
Why would, I mean, obviously, when we talk about story as far as creative sense, obviously there's more to it. But if that conveys the idea of the story, then it allows you to get a lot more stories into your rotation, which is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, but as far as what the public wants to know, that's not enough. Well, we want to know what happened, and we want to know...
I don't think we do anymore. You and I do.
I think you're exactly right on that. That's why we come where we are.
You may be correct there.
I don't think anybody really cares anymore.
Because you're... All right, so we've talked about this before, too. The phones, as much as we love these damn things, because they're so useful. I can't imagine trying to go back to life without one. I mean, I can because I lived it. But I think, I'd much rather have one. But it literally...
It's hard to carry the Encyclopedia Britannica in your pocket.
Exactly.
And that's essentially what you have.
Yeah, and even more than that. But because, studies show that just like pornography, phone usage changes our brain chemistry.
That's right.
Right? And because it changes our brain chemistry, we get addicted to the endorphin rush that the phone gives us, just like with pornography. And the more we can sensationalize things that we look at on our phones, then the more we get that endorphin rush, It's whatever titillates. Mm-hmm. And that's what the phone does. That's what social media does. And everything is geared towards that titillation. I don't know whether it's accidental or if it's intentional or just, is it a byproduct or is it, causation versus correlation? Which one is it? They go hand in hand. And because of that, we don't have a society that cares about the in-depth discussion of things.
Yeah.
And that's why everything becomes this umbrella, who's buggering who, and that's about it. And whether it's politically or sexually.
Did Amber Heard poop in the bed?
Right.
That's all we care about. So how did we get here from the election of 1876?
I was about to go exactly the same place here.
Anyway.
Well, yeah, we got there because, we were talking about the relative differences between 1876 and 2000 and 2016. As far as scope of injustice, and I'm using the air quotes there, 1876 is a much bigger injustice.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
but it seems clear, though, that at the very least, South Carolina and Louisiana's returns were fraudulent. What was officially reported.
Yes.
Florida's also very likely.
Yes. And that was something else I wanted to touch on because, just again, to remind modern listeners, it's like, well, how do they separate, what are they beating up the freedmen when they come to vote? Well, some places, yes.
Yeah.
But even simpler, it's like, oh, that guy used to be a slave. We're going to drop his vote in this ballot box, and we're just going to conveniently lose that box.
Yeah, it was back-end corruption more so than front-end corruption.
Right, because there's only so much of that you can do without disrupting everything.
That's right.
It's much easier to just say, well, we're just not even going to count his vote because we put it in a separate box.
Yeah, especially Florida. But South Carolina and Louisiana had serious election violence.
Yes, that's true.
I mean, they were organized paramilitary groups.
KKK.
Yeah, and they were keeping the freedmen from voting.
Yeah, so there is a lot of that too. I don't want to minimize
Grant had to send real troops to Louisiana.
Yeah.
To really essentially occupy, to keep a fraudulent state government from taking power. Louisiana's a mess.
Now,
South Carolina's a mess.
Was he in Louisiana by then?
Georgia.
He hadn't gone to Louisiana yet.
No.
Because I know he ends up there, right?
He ends up back in Georgia. That's where he dies.
Right, but he spends time as a Republican in Louisiana, doesn't he?
I believe so.
Maybe so.
I believe you're right. I believe he is part of what Grant does in sending military force to these places. I think Longstreet gets involved in that.
Yeah, but he's not in the military, obviously, but he's
I think at some point, yeah.
Really?
He's still part of the military, but then I think you're right. There is a civilian era to it as well.
Yeah.
Where he's like a commissioner of some sort or some kind of official for the Grant administration.
Yeah, and I only bring this in, though, because it just points to, how tied we are still to the Civil War. It's only 11 years earlier that it ended. So this is not as settled a thing as it should be, and certainly as it is today.
Yeah, we consider it settled because we're so far distant from that.
Right.
But the reality on the ground during the time was, it's a great big whine of, well, if you defeated me in battle, I'm going to figure out another way to get what I want, as we've talked about in other episodes.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That was the core of the issue, the South not accepting the verdict of the war.
That's correct.
And trying to keep it alive through
other means, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, basically terrorism and guerrilla warfare.
Right.
And that's, Grant had some success suppressing that, but not completely.
Well, it's almost, as we have learned in Afghanistan and Iraq, it's impossible to suppress that entirely.
It is impossible without going all Colonel Walter E. Kurtz on everybody. Basically, you go in and you just mow them down.
Yes, we had to destroy the town to save it.
Apocalypse Now does a great job of explaining that's where this inevitably leads if you really want to win.
And even then,
they
lost.
That's exactly right, because they lose their humanity along the way.
We lost.
Yeah,
I mean, Vietnam's the one in that 10-1 from Stripes.
And you're right, because to go back to that movie, that's what Kurtz has figured out, saying there's only one way we're going to win this, and we have to be as ruthless, brutal, and brilliant as the enemy is willing to be.
Well, but even then, I don't think you ultimately win, because
that's correct. That's right. He's speaking about destroying the enemy, which is kind of what we're talking about here.
Unless you kill all of them.
That's what he's what he's after. Is that he recognizes that you can't win this. You can't win an uncivilized conflict by using civilized methods.
Well, yes,
that's what he's saying.
Yeah, well, and I would say, and again, I know we're getting rabbit holed here, but just because it's important, because we are talking about, this is part of the corruption that causes the issue here. Mm-hmm. Obviously the country is much better condition than it was in 1876, much less 1865. Right. So, yeah, we are still dealing with those effects at this time, and ultimately it does get. It's not 100% resolved, obviously, the racial issues in this country, but it ultimately becomes a point where the vast majority of people, that is no longer an issue through civil methods. But unlike in Vietnam or in Afghanistan and Iraq, it's relatively the same culture. It's the same people that are dealing with this.
Right, yeah.
And, in those places where these things fail, it's because, and we talked about it in several episodes, if you don't have the history of what you're trying to impose, it's not going to work. So, anyways, that I don't want to rabbit hole too much, but I mean,
I think there's a good spot for a bourbon break.
And none of us actually are drinking any this morning.
Yeah, so we'll take a break, discuss it briefly, and then we'll get back on track because there was one more point about the Electoral Commission. So yes, we are here at the expansive Studio F.
Yes,
Johnny's Game Room down the hall from Reed's office.
Yes,
next door to the portal to the negative zone.
Yes, if you hear a flush, don't pay any attention, gentlemen. That's a nihilist taking his poop, which happens here. But
he went there. He went
to a nihilist dropping
on the toilet.
Yeah, pinching a loaf.
That's right, a negative loaf, mind you, because that's how this works. But notice
is pinching a negative loaf taking it back in?
Ooh, my goodness, let's
not go there.
Let's not go there. We're going to have to go neat for the moment, but you guys
have no ice?
I have ice. You guys want it, yeah.
Well, yes.
All right, yes, I see, because
Francis is pouring us something.
That's right. Most of the time we do this.
Just a little spot here.
We've already pre-poured everything. But today, and I'm sure you can hear it from my voice, I'm stepping away from the microphone to actually drop a cube into each
He's pinching a cube into the
glass here.
A splash.
A splash.
So this is
in here. We're all drinking the same thing because I poured everybody the same thing.
Thank you.
This is the Wild Turkey 101 that we have not used on the show before, gentlemen. It's brand spanking new for us. We've had the regular Wild Turkey. Oh my gosh, he's choking over there. He hadn't even drunk yet.
Got a good bouquet.
Yeah, absolutely.
To borrow the wine term.
Wild Turkey 101 versus the regular Wild Turkey.
Now, the 101 refers to the proof?
Proof, that's correct. So we're talking about a little bit more potency than what we had previously.
Regular Wild Turkey runs about 80 proof.
Right. So it's really, it's essentially the same, but not the same.
Wow, that is all on the tongue and the upper palate.
That's why we're asking here, boys.
Wow.
That's
got some good flavor.
It does. Wild Turkey I don't want to say it's our favorite, but it's pretty damn close.
It's up there, yeah.
It's kind of my new go-to.
I'm really liking the Old Forester, too, that we've been doing lately.
Yeah, and we've got several different versions of that, and we might try that one on one of these other episodes, but this has got a bite to it, but it is a beautiful bite.
Well, yeah, it's like sharp cheddar as opposed to mild. So it's
very good. That's a good
think of
layout.
it that way, because when we say bite and harsh, usually it's you think of rot gut, but that's
you think of negative, and it's not meant to be negative. It's just meant to be like a snip, something. Ooh, what? Actually, that sounded pretty cool on the
all on the tongue. That upper palate got a hint of that, like a burst of it's not pain, it's not fire, but in the nostrils. Real quick
potency,
but I get some sweetness on the tongue after that's done.
That's the pear, I think, which is one of the things that I have found about Wild Turkey that I like so much. I think that pear that they use, which is I think unique to them. I'm probably wrong, but it's certainly
they're not adding pear flavor. That's just
part of it.
That's how it's described. Again, with the pear and vanilla is how they describe the regular wild turkey. So you get that in this one, just more of it. You just kind of,
We've turned up the volume, shall we say.
yeah. We've been doing these higher proof ones here quite a bit lately. The old Granddad 114 and a bunch of other 100 proof level stuff.
Yeah, that Old Forester Signature is 100 proof.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I think the biggest difference between the normal 80s and sometimes to the 45s, to the 90 proofs that we get, which is the 45% alcohol, as opposed to the 50% that this would be, well, 50.5 technically, is that the higher the proof, the sharper the bourbon.
Yes.
And that sharpness, that bite, however you want to call it, I think tends to stick with you a little bit longer.
Yeah, I mean, the aging has to be a little different to mellow it back out when you're going higher proof. So,
and of course now, as we like to say, the ice to chill it and to help, getting that melt to bring out the flavor, obviously helps quite a bit. I think we all had our first drink before the ice had much of a chance to have an effect.
Yeah, a melt wise, you're correct, but chill wise, not so much. It was very chilled.
I definitely get the vanilla.
Yeah.
Once you let the ice melt a bit and that water brings out the flavor, I think the vanilla comes out quite a bit more. It's good stuff. It's very good stuff. You cannot go wrong with this. Now, what's the price point on this?
It's just about the same, $30.
That's an impressive $30.
Yeah, the one we keep rolling at.
Yeah,
we kind of.
It's only a few bucks more than regular wild turkey.
That's right.
But it's
reasonably priced and absolutely.
I don't know that I would go to this a lot because I like mine probably a little bit smoother.
Mm-hmm.
But it's got a very good flavor.
Well, the higher proofs give me a headache, and I don't, after the fact, I'm not.
Well, and that burn that was in the mouth, is starting to very slowly move into the gullet here. So it definitely sticks with you more than a lot of bourbons.
That's exactly right.
Because a lot of them, you get that in the mouth or the throat or the sinuses, wherever it is. And that's where it stays. And occasionally, you'll get some in the stomach as it collects there. But it's interesting because I can feel that movement down the throat and into the stomach, which I find fascinating. Usually, you don't get that as much.
So I don't get as much vanilla as with regular wild turkey. The pear flavor is kind of.
Did you have ice?
Yes, I dropped 1 cube at each one.
Is kind of amped up a little bit.
That's why I like it.
There's maybe a little oakiness to it.
Maybe. I think that's where the sharpness comes from. Is that oakiness is the char is where most of that comes from. And combined with the alcohol content. Mm-hmm. This is my guess. I could be speaking totally. I probably am speaking totally out my rear end, but whether or not
I wasn't going to say it, but I guess you can. Yes.
Whether or not my supposition is correct, I don't know. But that's my instinct is that the char with the alcohol content is what gives you the sharpness.
It's almost a grilled meat flavor.
Interesting.
Now that is a weird one.
So when you think about what they call burnt ends,
I was going to say barbecue.
It's got the almost smoke, almost kind of barbecue flavor.
A little char, a little charcoaly, but in a pleasant manner.
Yes, I mean it's
not like charcoal off the ground.
Yeah.
It's you're not chewing on a briquette. You're talking about something that has had smoke. In it.
So it's not medicine-y at all.
No,
not medicine-y at all.
That is the death knell.
Yeah, no toothpaste, nothing like that in it. No mint.
This is not this is definitely a sipping bourbon. This is not one you should be tossing back like it's like they do in movies. I always cringe whenever I see somebody. Yes, but you sipped your way through that because he didn't put a whole lot in our
yes, listeners. Francis poured just a small spot for us.
And of course, Martin has already
consumed it.
Trying to get trying to get all that flavor out of there.
Yeah, it's definitely a sipping bourbon, but it is, but it's not one that I think I don't know. I like it, but I probably would put this in my second level of
It's
go-tos.
kind of the second tier.
Yeah. Not necessarily of quality. Just when I think of my first level go-tos, this would be the second level.
Yeah,
Or if I'm looking for that change of pace.
Yeah.
Like that Devil's Cut. To me, that's one of my change of pace bourbons. This would be one of my change of pace bourbons.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I'm kind of my top tier is regular Wild Turkey and the Green River.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up really liking that Green River because I like that licorice taste that I got from it.
Yeah.
Because it was just so different.
Different is true, but I was not. I'm not a licorice fan, so that's one of the reasons.
I can't remember. But I don't think I can't remember how much I liked it.
It faded very quickly for me, whereas Wild Turkey has stuck with me.
Well, the thing I do like about this is that often we find with some bourbons there's an oily texture to them.
Yeah,
there is none of that
with this one,
which I like quite a bit because sometimes that oiliness overpowers the flavor.
Yeah,
and which tends often to happen with the medicine-y ones, but not always. Sometimes the ones that have what we would consider good flavor, the oiliness overrides it.
Yeah.
Which I like that this does not even have any hint of that.
Yeah, and I think right on the heels of those two is that 1920 Prohibition.
It is that one. That
Old
one there.
Forester.
That's fierce firewater for me.
Yeah,
it's heavy.
For me, my first tier obviously is always
super good flavor.
It was. Not missing that at all. It's just powerful.
Exactly, and that's what this is where this is to me. Good flavor, but so strong that it's just not one that I'm going to go to that as often. I'm at the point where I like that. The Old Forester, the Basil Hayden, the Woodford, the Double Oak, to me, because those are great combination of smoothness plus the flavor, and it's a tricky balance. It really is. Anyways,
cool. All right, so here's the scoop on the Electoral Commission. Again, it's 5 people from the House, 5 people from the Senate, 5 people from the Supreme Court.
Right. And, before we do that, I don't even think we've laid out how do we get to this point. So we said there's a 200,000 vote difference. So we've got
because the returns from Florida, South Carolina, Louisiana are contested. Plus, there's an issue with an elector from Oregon. So no one has reached
the level
the electoral count level they need to get to.
Exactly. That's where I want to go to. So
Hayes trails.
Yes.
Tilden's in lead, but even Tilden doesn't get there. So it's thrown to the Congress. Congress can't settle it. They don't know what to do. So they appoint this 15-member commission in January, and they're trying to even it out. I mean, they're legitimately trying to make it fair and even it out between Democrats and Republicans.
I think they understand that you've got to have a clear-cut winner.
Right.
Caesar must be undoubted Caesar, as they say.
So,
yes.
From the Supreme Court, they selected Justice David Davis, and he was seen as very impartial. However, Democrats in Illinois elected him to the Senate, hoping to influence him. Hey, we've picked you for the Senate. You're going to vote for our guy, right?
Right. Now, this is a time when, because people are not going to remember this, this is a time when the states at the government level, not the people level, selected who was going to be senator.
Democrats in the Illinois state legislature, the Illinois Senate, basically picked him.
Yes. So this is not he was voted in, he didn't run for office.
Yes.
It's an appointed office.
Yes. So he all of a sudden then decides, I'm going to resign from the commission end of it, take up my Senate seat, and leave that spot vacant. Well, now there's nobody left from the Supreme Court that's really seen as impartial. So the next guy up is Joseph P. Bradley. He's seen as the most impartial remaining member, but he's a Republican.
Yeah.
So basically what happens then is on 8-7 votes, they accept the Hayes returns from all the disputed states, rather than the Tilden returns. That gives Hayes a 1 point or a 1 vote
It's
win.
the smallest margin of victory.
Yes, 185, 184 to the Electoral College. So, what then happens is a little closed door, a little backslapping. Again, despite their differences, they're all pretty much the same kind of person.
Yeah.
So they get together in Congress, and for a pledge of withdrawing the military occupation from Louisiana and South Carolina and essentially ending Reconstruction, Democrats go along with the result.
Right.
Basically, it's tit for tat, quid pro quo.
They get what they wanted anyway.
That's right.
What they thought Tilden would do
right.
in Reconstruction, they get anyway. And they're fine with letting...
Right, because realistically, at this point in time, the party structure at the national level, who's president, who makes up the Senate and the House, doesn't really matter as much to the man on the ground.
No.
At the state, you go about your life, they do not affect much of what goes on. It's not like it is today. So,
and there were a lot of things that were alike about Tilden and Hayes.
Yes,
they were.
The parties are not. Once you get this issue of slavery out of the way, which it is.
Yeah.
At the national level, there's not really going to be a whole lot of difference.
The other big difference was money.
Yes, that is the big issue.
Coining of silver and stabilizing the economy.
Yes, there is a third party that actually ran. It's called the Greenback Party,
and pulled enough votes in one state that hurt Tilden.
Yes,
in one state.
So that's Tilden. Part of the issue here.
Yeah, if they had not been involved, Hayes would have done much better. But it's the hard money guys. It's gold back or gold backing the currency. And Tilden and Hayes are both gold guys, hard money guys, and are not really in favor of a lot of coinage of silver. Coinage of silver is seen as something that would help rural areas pay debts and things like that, because it's, silver does not cost as much.
Right, it's much lower per ounce value.
Hayes felt that silver coinage would be inflationary and would hurt manufacturers. So they're both guys that are going to want to stabilize the economy in the same way. So again, there's not a ton of difference here. So once the Democrats got what they wanted with an end of Reconstruction and an end of military occupation of Louisiana and South Carolina, they were like, sure.
Right. We can go back to, oppressing everybody that doesn't look like us. Is essentially what they're looking for.
Well, exactly. Right. That's why they want it. Because let the fox run the hen house for a while, as it were.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that is very much it. That they are now back in control of every state government.
Right. It is at this point where
they start basically the next 100 years of suppressing minorities.
Right. It is around this time when there's no more African Americans, blacks, whatever you want to call them, freedmen, because whatever the term is at the time.
Yeah.
They no longer are elected from the South, because you got to remember for that first 10 years, you see a lot of black men go to Congress because the white men are not voting, or if they are voting, they're being outnumbered because there's more freedmen in some of these states than there are white men.
Yeah, especially in congressional districts.
Yeah. So, it can very much influence some of that. But now, once that's done, that's impossible. That's not going to...
That's all gone.
Yeah, that's all gone. Yeah.
So, and, because of this controversy, Hayes is not well thought of. But
he's
really,
a one-termer, right?
Yeah. He pledged to only run the one term. He basically said, as part of the deal, I'll just do one term. But he's actually a very decent guy.
Yeah.
He is seen as just kind of this honest guy. But he was a little bit like Grant. He was kind of taken advantage of by some, sharp factions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's Grant 2.0 or Grant Light, one might say.
Yeah, and you're running up on this notion of there needs to be civil service reform. He's making an attempt at that, but he doesn't quite have the juice to carry it all the way through. Again, this is the emergence of guys like Roscoe Conkling in New York that control the custom house in New York. New York's the busiest port in the country, probably in the world, short of London maybe. So what's coming through New York generates a crap ton of money, and again, the more people you can stuff into these cush jobs at the port of New York as collectors, that's that many more, patronage things that you have. Chester Arthur he's the big dog daddy of the port of New York. So he just doesn't quite have the juice to carry through the civil service reform like he wants.
Well, and I think part of the problem is how he got to be the Republican nominee to begin with.
Yeah.
He on the very first ballot, he got 61 votes.
Yeah.
As opposed to Blaine's 285. Blaine tops out at 351 on the 7th ballot, yet he still doesn't win. He is the clear-cut plurality favorite.
Yeah.
And yet he still can't get...
You can't carry it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Blaine is
would
one
the
of
party
those...
have been better with Blaine? Probably.
Blaine's one of those figures in history that... he's kind of that guy that, really, we got to vote for Blaine.
Yeah.
Are you sure there's not an acceptable someone else? Because he runs many times.
Right.
He loses a nomination several times. He wins it one time.
He's like Douglas.
He loses Adlai Stevenson and stuff like that.
And who's the guy in the 20s that was running constantly? Yeah, because there's three guys. Douglas in the 1800s, he runs multiple times for things.
Yeah.
Smith.
No, not Smith.
Well, it's Adlai Stevenson.
Early 20, like in the 1920s. Shoot, I forget who it is, but he runs like multiple times and loses every single time.
Yeah. I'm sure I will.
He was the lawyer in the Clarence Darrow trial.
Oh, you're talking about William Jennings Bryan.
Jennings Bryan, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Oh, okay, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Blaine's only nominated one time and loses, but he's involved, and he has a lot of fans, but he's just not acceptable to the reform-minded elements of the party, and so he just never, or just most of the time, he just doesn't have the juice to get over the top for the nomination when there's other people out there. Again, he loses the nomination the next time to Garfield.
That's right.
And Garfield's another Ohio combat vet, very much like Hayes, very reform-minded, honest guy.
Yeah, the power, because of the Civil War, the power has shifted from Virginia, because when you look at the first presidents, up through the Civil War, Virginia dominates politics. And now that, because Virginia is one of the Confederate states, nobody comes out of Virginia anymore.
Yeah.
So the power has shifted to the Midwest.
Yes, very much the juices has moved west and settled in Ohio again. Not just Hayes, but then Garfield, McKinley, John
Grant
Sherman
has his Midwest roots.
Yeah, John Sherman never makes it to president, but is a very influential and powerful senator from Ohio.
Much of Lincoln's cabinet were Ohio guys. You know,
Yeah.
those were the guys he ran against, Seward and Chase, that he incorporated in. So Ohio is in its ascendancy here, which it would continue for the next 50 years.
Yeah, Warren G. Harding. I forgot about Warren G. Harding's
Yeah.
Ohio.
Yeah.
So, in the end, again, the South gets really what they want. The end of the military occupation in the South. They can go back to business as usual, in their minds, business as usual. And preventing these freedmen, the newly freedmen, from voting from now on.
Right, and
And
basically
any-
sharecropping gets instituted.
Yeah.
And it doesn't put them back into slavery, but the conditions are damn near the same.
Right, I mean, they're completely disenfranchised, completely excluded from public life. And, the federal government moves on as it had. Again, there's some attempts at the civil service reform. Hayes doesn't quite get there.
Well, you also have to remember what else is going on in the country at this time. And again, it's not to say that I'm excusing that basically the federal government, the North, has said, we're really tired of this stuff. You guys just do whatever the hell you want. The war's over. Slavery, to them, the slavery issue has been solved.
Yeah. That's very well put, but that's exactly it.
Yes.
That's
and so
right.
what happens is we're
Don't
talking
ask
1876. What's going on? All eyes have turned to the West.
Yes.
We have finished the railroad.
Yes, very
and
much.
we are trying to conquer the rest of the continent. So what we were busy doing now, instead of trying to free the slaves, is we are now conquering and
dominating for
reservationing
Yeah.
the Indians out west. So we have,
It's because this is the time of the Indian Wars. Yeah.
yeah. So basically, we have. It really sucks because we've turned from one disenfranchised group to the other. Instead of freeing one, we freed one. Now we're going to go ahead and
enslave
put our
another.
I mean, it's not enslaved, but like I said, we're reservationing them. We are partitioning them into places where basically they are non-entities.
That's right.
And of course, giving them the worst land possible.
Right.
Oh, a piece of desert. Oh, I think they'd like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, nobody likes that.
All while adopting a don't ask, don't tell attitude
Yes.
with regards to the South.
Well, yes, because surprisingly enough, the Indians, the Native Americans, whichever term you wish to use, they were even seen as less than the freedmen, which is surprising.
I mean, the savages.
Yeah, yes, even more
savages.
savage than
Yeah.
what the freedmen were.
Yeah,
considered.
I mean, the freedmen were just viewed as useless.
Right.
As somebody you didn't want participating in civic life. But
at least they knew their way around what was considered modern society.
Well, they knew
at the
that.
time.
Well, you know,
Whereas
they could serve as servants.
right.
they knew they were willing to take what what the whites considered to be their proper place. They knew their place, whereas the savages they fought back. You know, they're shooting at us.
Right.
The attitude became extermination.
That's exactly it. Yes,
Yeah.
if you will not conform.
And you talk about Kurtz, you know.
That's right. Yeah, well, that's where it comes from.
That's where the attitude eventually would get with the Native American tribes in the Midwest and the
you will
West,
either,
in the far
you
West.
will either conform and become white in attitude anyway, or we will exterminate you. And they did
Well,
both.
it's not so much become white as you will conform and submit,
That's right. Absolutely.
because that's all that mattered.
Right.
And because the dominating force in the country, which you know, the white government, they didn't even want them to conform. Conform wasn't even the issue. Submit meant you just go away.
Yeah. This
Because
is
we want
ours.
what you, this is ours now. Which really, you know, on the one hand, you say, well, this is one of the great injustices of history. Well, maybe, but you know, it's no different than any other history. When a group comes into, and I'm not excusing, I'm just saying that it's not unique.
Well, that's right. Yeah, we've been to this movie a few times before.
Well, yes, whether you want to talk Africa, Asia, or Europe, doesn't matter. When some group moves in and takes over.
Yeah, it's not just colonialism. Although
Right, I mean,
it's a lot of
It's happened throughout history, for sure.
Whether you call it, you know, we think of colonialism, we think it's European based.
That's
No.
right. Well,
It's when anybody comes in and takes over property.
it was
that
just
belongs
simply,
to somebody
had
else.
greater tools and more sophistication in the 1800s.
Yes,
And the ability.
and it's more recent. That's why we think of it.
Exactly. But, you know, William the Conqueror, you know, in 1066 is essentially the same thing.
Yes.
And
well,
the Saxon people suffered under the Norman rule until they assimilated.
look at biblical times when Abraham, is granted the territory that is what is now modern day Israel.
Yeah.
Now, granted, his people don't really take over until a few centuries later, but that's still considered their land in their minds.
Okay.
And they got to kick the Canaanites out when they get there.
Oh, that's right. And we won't even talk about Joshua.
Exactly.
Because, it's by the point of this. But, so this is a very old story.
It is.
And to round this episode out and bring us back into, I would like to think, civilization, how the hell do we make sure this doesn't happen again? Maybe there's the question.
Well, you know...
Have we gotten beyond it, boys and girls? Does human nature change at all?
Well, the only reason I say we have not is this. And again, this has nothing to do with the election, but since you asked the question...
That's kind of where we're dancing around, I think. This is what I'm hearing.
This will always be an issue. And it's kind of tied to the election because, you know, the suppression of the votes and
That's right, yeah, that's what...
oppressing that minority community to make sure that they don't negatively, from the oppressor's standpoint, don't
Right.
negatively impact things. The reason this happens and continues to happen is the lack of two things. And I don't mean just in this country. I mean anywhere humanity is.
Right.
Whether it's communist China, Putinist Russia, some Rwanda and Burundi where genocides go on, doesn't matter. Venezuela, where the haves and the have-nots, where the haves are eating now they're the ones eating the zoo animals because that's all that's left, and everybody else is starving. It doesn't matter. It's a lack of two things: One is a common culture, common set of beliefs.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Because even in the same country, that can happen. We see it here, we see it everywhere, we see it, whether you want to call that haves versus have-nots, but it's also that lack of respect for the inherent dignity of the human person.
That's kind of where we always land back.
It's you want to talk about the root of all evil, applied evil.
Very good.
Applied evil.
Yeah.
It is that.
Yeah.
Where you look at somebody and say, you know what? They are less than me, therefore I should have what they have.
Therefore,
and
I must
use
dominate
whatever
them.
means necessary to acquire it.
Yes. Might makes right.
Yeah. Whether you want to talk about whether it's land, colonialism type of thing, whether you call it colonialism or just conquering one group conquering another, or property. Oh, look, they've got some gold in Mexico. I think I'm going to take my galleons over and collect all of it and take it back to Spain. Or if you want to get even very personal, you want to talk about rape, it's the same kind of thing. It is, you are less than me, and I want what you have, whether it's something physical or not. And this election, if you want to tie it back, is an outgrowth of that. Mm-hmm. It is because that happened in those 3 states.
Even though there was at least an attempt at fairness here with the commission, it still didn't quite.
Right, because enough of it happened, because those states had enough electoral votes that this happened. Now, if it had happened, say, in a state the size of Rhode Island instead of Florida, wouldn't be an issue. Because there weren't enough electoral votes.
So in other words, the bullies did win. They did get their way.
Oh, yeah.
Even though that wasn't... Because they
didn't
really give a rat's ass who won.
They got their way in the sense that they got the end of Reconstruction.
Right, they got what they wanted.
They didn't get their presidential pick, but they got what he was going to do anyway.
That's right. And therein lies, I think, the issue. It was not a partisan issue. It was a power issue.
Is it? What's the difference? I mean, realistically,
I agree, and that's splitting the hair mighty thin, as they say.
Yeah, it wasn't a partisan issue in the sense that we had to have our candidate,
which is where it would be.
We had to have our issue,
right? Our issue, and it was again an issue that not enough people objected to otherwise to really prevent. Because again, everybody else acquiesced to this.
Yes,
and there was no real outcry. There was no real public outcry that Reconstruction was ending. Everybody'd had enough. Yes. It's 10 plus years of this.
Right, well, it's no different than we got to get out of Afghanistan and Iraq. Yeah. We're tired. Yeah. And we're not changing anything. And again, that goes back to those 2 common elements. Common belief system, common respect for the human dignity, the inherent dignity of the human person. That was, we have different beliefs than they do in Afghanistan and Iraq. We cannot impose democracy in a place where they don't even understand the concept. We cannot impose respect for all races in a place where they don't even understand the concept. You have to teach them the concept before you can impose it legally to make it really workable. And that's what it was 100 years later before we could even approach that.
Yeah, and the military just really doesn't do that.
No.
So
if we get to the point where the military is doing that, we are now in the military dictatorship, which is what you are dangerously close to in the South.
Very much so.
During Reconstruction.
Yeah, the unreconstructed states before their readmission, essentially that's what it was.
Yeah.
The Army ran the places, but they had to.
They had to, yes.
They had to, because otherwise it would have just been status quo ante.
And, and realistically, in effect, if not in fact, that's where we end up.
That's where they ended up anyway.
Yeah, which was probably always going to happen. Because unless you moved all of those freedmen to the North, which the North was going to have absolutely none of, because they're still, they may want them freed, but that doesn't mean they want to live with them. So, I mean, let's be realistic. The people in the North were only slightly better than the people in the South. They just weren't actively enslaving anyone. They were okay with bad conditions as long as they weren't legally slaves.
They were willing to go so far, but only so far.
Right. Well, it was a philosophical issue for those who were abolitionists.
Yeah,
as well as a moral issue.
To their credit, there's a leading abolitionist, and again, Hayes was a devotee of abolition.
Yeah.
A lot of them understood the end game of that.
Yes.
and were truly for real equality.
Right, absolutely.
But that was a very small
Yes.
group.
Most people just
Really.
didn't do the work. They wouldn't think
They
that
didn't,
far ahead.
right, exactly. They did not take that to its conclusion of, okay, well, abolition doesn't just mean an end of slavery. It means we must live together
Yes.
and respect one another.
Yes.
God save us from the weak-minded, boys and girls. You know,
Well-
we're over at an hour now. We
Yep,
just wrapped
And
this
you
up.
said we couldn't do very much on this. It'd be a quick episode. Martin always says that, and we always go an hour.
That's right.
So, gentlemen, before we adjourn this episode, there's a small matter that we did not cover.
Oh, yes.
during
we should have done
bourbon
this during
break.
the bourbon break, yes.
So I would like to do it now. Listeners, as we record just this moment, just this week,
just a couple of days ago now.
we have heard of the passing of Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom. And if you're a longtime listener, you know that going all the way back to episode 15...
Yeah.
Was it that long ago?
Yes,
Yes, it was. It was
episode
very early.
15.
Wow.
September 6, 2019, we did our episode on Queen
On Her
Elizabeth
Majesty.
II.
That's right.
Give the old gal a break.
So we were fans. Again, what she meant to post-war Britain, I think you're going to have some time before anybody
Yes.
writes about this. But I think her, just the way she carried herself, the way she took on the responsibilities of the monarchy, really unified Britain. Again, she worked as a truck mechanic during the war.
Right.
You know, she did not see herself as like this, I'm so much better than all of you. I'm queen, I have a job to do, I'm going to do it. And I'm going
Duty
to stay
was
out of
very
harm.
important.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
and
saw
even
a quote.
The statements from Charles have all been about how much she respected the duty of
Yes.
the position. And that
This
he
to
wanted
show
carry
you,
that on.
she was also a woman of great faith, and I love this quote. I'd never seen it before. She said to someone, I forget who it was, because that wasn't the point. It was what she said. She said, I so wish that Christ would come back in my lifetime. Somebody asked her why. She said, so I could lay my crown at his feet. To me, that speaks volumes of not just her faith, but how she understood the crown.
That's correct. Yes, beholden to a greater power than
Yes.
themselves.
She did not view herself as an absolute. Obviously, she can't because she couldn't because she didn't have that power. And what power she did have, she didn't really even attempt to exercise. I mean, there were things that any monarch could still do, but they don't because it probably would be ignored, and you'd end up having a real crisis.
Yeah, I mean, it
and-
would be a British constitutional crisis.
Yeah. So we don't want that. But, you know, it showed that she saw her duties as monarch with a proper perspective. She had two she was supposed to serve. Obviously, God and her people.
That's
And
right.
unfortunately, the serving God part, you know, people, you never really got to see that because I don't know where you get the opportunity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that quote just spoke volumes to me of the great faith she must have had.
She was a unifying. They called her the glue that kept the country together through 70 years almost of 70 years of change, and that continuity is what and stability is what people keep coming back to in the media, and I'm sure they will continue to do so on that. And that's one of the great advantages of that system. Even though power changes as is necessary, at least when people are at each other's throats on either side of the political aisle, you've got somebody in charge, titularly so, but nevertheless, that you can believe in. It never allows that mutual destruction, politically speaking, of each other.
Yeah.
And that is a wisdom of that system, I think.
Yeah, our institutions in this country used to hold that place. Whereas there, it's personified. I mean, it's an institution in that it's the crown,
Yeah.
but it's personified in whoever wears the crown.
Because there's
here-
always a circuit breaker that if one side or another takes too much power and gets too mean, you could be called to Buckingham Palace and told, "Serve my people, Prime Minister," or whatever.
Yeah, and that still held great weight.
That's correct, very much so. That's because she
It's
could
going to
ask
be interesting
for,
to see what Charles does, and
That's-
whether or not because he's not a popular figure, generally speaking. Now he's going to get a lot of sympathy because his mom just died.
Yeah.
And Brits, traditionally they rally behind their monarchs,
Right.
but he's got a lot of baggage.
He does, but he's also been around so long, and he's such a well-known quantity. I suspect they'll rally around him well.
Well, yes, but for
could-
how long? See, that's the thing.
Yeah, and that's if he continues to chart the course that his mother charted of moderation and service and duty, I think you'll find that he'll probably do just fine. That seems to be what the British people want.
And honestly,
I think that's going to be tough for him, honestly.
Yeah.
I think he's going to try to jab himself into politics more than she did.
And that is the big question everybody's asking. That's right.
Just kind of rubbing on the Prime Minister, hey, how come we're not doing X?
Right.
It's like, well, Your Majesty, right now in Parliament, there's no, there's no juice for that.
Well, and with the new Parliament and the new Prime Minister, too. I mean, my Lord, it was, 2 days?
It's very much the last official act she did was to ask the new leader of the party to form a new government.
That's right, exactly. Yeah. So essentially, this is Charles's prime minister, for all intents and purposes, and the two of them have the opportunity. And
you want to talk about an opportunity for a clean break?
That's right.
I mean, it could be. I mean, we could go on and on about this, but it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in the coming years because he's only going to be king for so long. I don't see him living to be as long as his mom. Because it just rarely happens. He might.
Yeah,
he might. So he could be king for another 30 years.
Could be.
Because he's, 66 now, right?
Yes.
Right.
So, and she died at 96, so he could be king for 30 years, in which case William will become king approximately the same age he is, which, is not necessarily a good thing. So it's going to be interesting to see how things go.
I mean, I think people that were thinking that this is going to be a short kingship, well, it's not going to be 70 years, but it's not going to be 2 years.
Right.
I mean, he's
unless he were to suddenly die, this is probably a 20-year.
Yeah, I think for sure we'll see 15
he will
to 20 years.
surpass the comparison that's often given with Victoria's eldest son,
Edward. Yes.
Edward, that's correct. Who reigned for about 10 years and had his own period. He was the Edwardian period is very specific, but it was still kind of low. Whereas it was short.
And he was in poor health as a lifelong smoker. And overweight,
but even
and
Victoria in England, she was queen for so long. But after her husband died, she was not a huge figure in the same way that Elizabeth has been.
That's correct. That's right. In fact, she by her hands-off approach set the tone for many after that.
Yes.
It took a while for that to change and work its way out. But we could go on and on. But we want to finish to the Queen, gentlemen. To the Queen, we got to. May she rest in peace, and God save the King, King Charlie.
Gnarly Charlie.
Yeah.
All right, so what is next time, sir? Real quick.
Oh, my God. We're going back to Code of Honor, but we're going to do the hardest of our philosophers, gentlemen. We're going to do Immanuel Kant. We're going to...
What was that? Immanuel what?
Cough.
Kant.
Not Kant.
Oh, no, I was thinking
another word. There's another word there.
Oh, no,
you did a good pronunciation. So
I would think so. We all pledge to make sure to get that right in the next 2 episodes as we delve a little bit deeper into...
Yes, we don't ever want to get to the point where we say Immanuel Kant was a...
Yeah, that's right. We want to be able to make sure that we recognize, in many people's eyes, the most important of the Enlightenment philosophers. If you had to have only one, it's usually Kant that comes to the top of the list. And we're going to talk about it. So join us next time, folks. You're going to enjoy it.
Hope you enjoyed another pointless discussion of eternal questions. Remember, new episodes published every Friday at noon Eastern.
Spread the word. We're on all the major podcast platforms. And leave us a comment or review because that helps others find us.
We're on Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website, snakesandotters.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Join us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.